We're joined via Zoom from Manchester by Dr. Jonathan Spangler, who is a historian at Manchester Metropolitan University, specialising in European monarchies. Details, of course, emerging all the time, Jonathan. Pretty limited at the moment, we have to say, but this announcement earlier does seem rather concerning.
Yes, I think it is very, for an institution that's usually quite tight-lipped to institute a formal announcement like this, I think it does indicate that there is something serious. And the fact that the heir and the entire close group of the royal family, the senior royals, are all going to Balmoral does tell us that this may very well be a serious transitional moment in the history of the United Kingdom.
Of course, she's kept busy. We saw those pictures just there with her and Liz Truss earlier this week. But, you know, she has had a few health problems in recent weeks and months. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, I think it's important to always keep in mind that a monarch isn't like any other sort of job in that you can't really retire with a pension at age 70, although some of the modern monarchies, like in the Netherlands, have done that. And so most people who wound down their careers in their 70s weren't really expecting to keep going into the 90s. So I think it's really quite impressive to see how much dedication Elizabeth II has really had to maintaining her profile over this last year or so, and especially in such a difficult year or two we've all had.
And Jonathan, as a historian, is it possible to sum up what impact the Queen has had on the UK during her 70-year reign?
It's a very good question, and of course historians don't like to formulate things until a good deal of time has passed by. But I'm fairly certain that people will see the monarch, the reign of Elizabeth II, as really being a key transition from the post-war era to the 21st century, and really maintaining the traditions that were established by her ancestors, Victoria, George V, and transitioning from the British Empire into being the head of the Commonwealth. And it's really her role as the glue, almost, the spiritual connection that she put with the Commonwealth of Nations that I think will be her biggest legacy. And I think it's a very good one for the global community.
Of course, she has overseen a period of immense change. How has the Queen approached the role of the monarch, and how did it differ to her predecessors?
Again, this is a little bit difficult maybe to see until we have a bit more distance of time. But I think it's fairly evident that the role of public opinion and the media and being more in the public spotlight has really had quite an impact on the Queen. And she and her husband, Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, really made an effort, especially in the 1960s, to realize that modernization meant being much more in the public eye, and that things like much more private moments like royal births, royal deaths, were now very much more a public thing. And I believe that they embraced it, although they got some steps wrong, certainly in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but have emerged as a quite stronger institution, I think, in the eyes of most of the British people.
Jonathan, do we know much about the Queen, the individual, rather than Queen Elizabeth, the monarch?
I think we really don't. It's one of the highlights, I would say, of the life of Elizabeth II, is that, like her parents and like her grandparents, and particularly her grandmother, Queen Mary of Teck, their entire persona was very, very private. And everything that they did on the outside is for the state, for ceremonial, for ritual, for embodying the nation of the British people. Whereas private life, I think, is much more difficult to really see. I think it's quite well known that the Queen, like most of her family, is very much interested in the outdoors, in horses, in dogs. And that's very much in the tradition of her family, going back several centuries. In fact, they've always really connected with nature, with horses, with dogs, And that's, I think, particularly poignant why, at this moment, it's interesting that the Queen is in Balmoral, such a special, cherished place within her family.
Yeah, you mentioned Balmoral there. I wanted to ask you about Balmoral. How significant is it to the Queen as a place and also the family?
It's a very interesting place because for such a long time, for most of the 17th and 18th century, the monarchy was really just settled in and around London, Windsor Castle, Hampton Court, and Scotland was very unfashionable until Victoria and Albert bought the property in the 1830s, 1840s, and it really became the spiritual home almost for the family. Partly, like I said before, this interest in nature and getting connected to sport up in Scotland. But at the same time, it was a perfect place to get away from the media, from newspapers, from social life. And it was one of the few places where they could really just be a family. And so therefore it means something quite special to all of them as a bit of an escape for all the members of the dynasty and their extended friend network.
Jonathan, the Queen has had less on her plate in terms of kind of official workload, as it were, but it has, of course, been a very busy year, sometimes of celebration, including, of course, the Platinum Jubilee. And we've seen the Queen, you know, happy and smiling at the Chelsea Flower Show and also the Windsor Horse Show.
Yes, that's right. So it has been quite a year, and I guess if we look at it as a sequence of years, her husband's health and then death and the global pandemic, and yet through it all, I think the Queen, like her parents, saw her role very much as appearing in public as much as possible and sort of symbolizing the will of the nation to carry on, to keep working. And so I think in a way maybe reinvigorated her, but you know, let's always remember that she is a woman in her mid-90s, and so it is time to slow down. So there have been a number of cancelled events, things like the state opening of Parliament, the trooping of the horses, which the Queen in the past would have never, ever missed. So there is certainly a slowing down that has happened over this past year. And in a way, it made it all the more special when at the end of the Jubilee weekend, the Queen appeared on the balcony, as always, and waved to the people of London and the media around the world.
Indeed. Jonathan, many thanks. That's Dr. Jonathan Spangler, historian at Manchester Metropolitan University.